Okay, so to give a brief background about what inclusive talk is, it's a feminist discourse invented to educate, inform, and promote disability voices in current affairs. The team is composed of 3 members. That is Ashana Matovu, Maureen Kalunji, and myself, Shana Shami. We are all women with disabilities. Personally, I am a gender and disability rights expert, and Maureen, who has joined us, she's right here. I'll give her a moment to talk about herself before we proceed. Unfortunately, our other co-host, Ashana Matovu, is unwell, so she cannot join us this evening, but she's the executive director of Nafetu Sobola Foundation. Maureen, you can talk briefly about yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shana. Good evening to our listeners. Good evening to Roshi, our speaker of the day, and Annette, as she joins. My name is Maureen Kalunji. I'm a disability inclusion advocate, and we co-host Inclusive Talk with Shana and Asha. In this, we try to navigate the current situations and current things that are on trend to see that even with the perspective of disability. So I'm glad to be here. Learn from our speakers. Let's have a nice evening.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Annette, I have sent you an invitation to speak, so please respond to it, or you can click on your microphone and then I will receive your request to speak and then we can make you a speaker. Okay, so just about what we have been doing with the Sustainable Development Goals series. Last week we discussed the state of Sustainable Development Goal 13, reduced inequalities, with Mr. Roger, who's here with us again today. He's a technical advisor of Association of Refugee Women in Uganda, and Mr. James Muomba Mungu, the Executive Director of Refugees with Disability. They are disparate, yet shared perspectives opened our eyes to the status of refugees, rather to the situation of refugees with and without disabilities in Uganda. So if you did miss that discussion and you'd like to have a listen, the recording is actually pinned up on the Disability Lens profile. You can go through it. And for tonight, we are talking about Sustainable Development Goal 13, which is climate action. It's fast becoming a global concern, with low to middle income countries like Uganda being the center of attention because of the level of vulnerability to climate change, rather to climate shocks, despite being the least contributor to the climate crisis. And Uganda, being a signatory to the Paris Agreement and the Sendai Framework, has not compelled the country to prioritize climate change and mitigation measures, worsening the livelihoods and lives of people with intersectional identities of gender and disability, whose deaths are 4 times higher than those without disabilities. So tonight we are pleased to host practitioners in climate action and disability inclusive disaster risk and reduction to help us understand the complexities around SDG 13, progress and level of inclusion of persons with disabilities. Roger, I would like you to take this moment and introduce yourself, and then it will be followed by Annette Bavillier. Thank you.
Good evening, listeners. Once more, thank you, Shana, for hosting this edition of the program focusing on SDG 13, which is climate action. So I am Kega Rojenwa. I am gender and climate justice advocate. I work with communities to promote resilience to climate disasters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Annette, I'm sending you another invite to speak. just look at the white pop-up at the bottom of your screen and respond to it. Because I don't know why we're failing to troubleshoot. Okay, Roger, then let's start. In the books I have read, the articles I've read, several practitioners contend that intersections of climate change and disability enhance inequality for persons with disabilities. Could you explain to us how true this is?
Okay, Shana, thank you so much for this opportunity once more, and good evening to our listeners. Now, if you look at it critically, you will see that before we have natural occurrences like natural disasters, climate-induced disasters, you see persons with disability are already facing severe challenges because they are facing challenges in terms of discrimination, accessing services, all of that. So now when disaster happens, you realize that persons who are okay are going to run away. For example, in a flood situation, you will find that when there is flood, persons who are able to run will run away and they will leave persons with disabilities behind. In a landslide situation, once there is an early warning signal, people who are up will run away and they will leave persons with disability behind. So you realize that climate change and climate-induced disasters multiply or amplify the already existing inequality for persons with disability within our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Roger. And you're quite right. There's something I read about persons with disabilities being actually last options in times of disaster. And even then, at times of rescue, their assistive devices are left. So the person has to choose between being saved as a person with a disability with their assistive device or without it. And in some cases, some persons with disabilities have opted to rather stay where they are, where the disaster is, because the cost of the assistive device is also high for them to just leave it like that in favor of having their lives saved, which is quite unfortunate. I'm still trying to troubleshoot with Annette. I do not know what the problem is with Annette. I really cannot tell now. But then let's continue. So climate-related events, they hold negative effects on the health of persons with disabilities. Could you share with us the health implications of climate change for vulnerable communities and potential strategies to address them?
Now, when you look at climate-induced disasters like flood, when flood comes, then it definitely means the whole area is submerged. First, because of the disability, the person is first of all challenged to run away. And when there is flooding, the water now becomes contaminated and polluted. Once you are unable to run away and you have to stay in that situation, which means you have to get the polluted water, if only you are alive, because definitely the disaster, the flood might end up taking you away. But in areas where you have people who have been rescued, they face issues of sanitation. There is no clean water, then people are not able to properly take care of their themselves in terms of washing and in terms of drinking water. And now with lack of drinking water, you get into dehydration. When people drink polluted water, they get waterborne diseases like cholera and all of that. So you find that when there is a challenge in terms of flooding, the health risk posed by the disaster is amplified amongst persons with disability because they are abandoned behind. How do we get out of this? You see, we have a very big problem I think, especially in Africa, where we look at focusing more on the deniers, the theories, and all of that, especially when it comes to climate change governance. African countries most of them don't have disaster management plans. If they have disaster management plans, they are only at the level of ministries and they are in cupboards, they are carrying dust, and when you ask what is happening, that we are not implementing our plans, then they'll tell you there is limited resources because some ministries are prioritized and other ministries are under-prioritized. But I think somewhere along the conversation, we are going to get deep into the Sendai Framework, and we are going to look at how these disaster management plans are even developed. Are persons with disability even involved? Because you see, most of these policy documents are developed at a higher level. That is let me say, it's a global document, the Paris Framework. Countries have signed up to it, but are they domesticating it? Are they bringing it down to the grassroots level, that the voice of a boy or girl, man or woman with disability will contribute to tell them what is the challenges that comes with that? Let's look at another option we have, where we have droughts. In certain parts of the country, we have droughts. And now, this drought, when you look at how do people survive this drought, especially persons with disability, you find that it is challenging. They are forgotten. They are left behind to die if, God willing, if they survive, then they are going to survive by the mercy, or somebody might come like, okay, I think there is a person with disability that way. Please, can you go and help him or her? You get, so there is like a pity, and these persons with disability, most of them are carrying out economic activities and they pay taxes. They go to vote. Looking at the political side of it again is another whole conversation. So in other aspects of community development, like taxation in terms of their businesses and all of that, they do contribute wholly. But when it comes to disaster management policies that are able to take care of them in the event of a disaster, they are completely left behind. So you have this intersection of challenges facing persons with disabilities when it comes to climate change and its impact. The impact is more severe on persons with disabilities than persons without disability.
So much, Roger, for noting that. And the challenges persons with disabilities go through whenever there's health-related complications because of climate change. So my next question is, persons with disabilities are the most affected by climate change related, addition of the climate change related topics in the education curriculum has been suggested to address the climate crisis in future. Could you elaborate on the specific areas that you think would be most beneficial for students?
Okay, thank you so much. Now, one thing I want to really share is, you see, climate crisis, especially in the global south, is underreported. When you have climate crisis, heat waves, floods, landslides in the global north, you find that every media house covers it. But when it is in the global south, it is some kind of like neglected. It remains to be your issue and you have to manage it the way you want to manage it. But if you look at our educational curriculum, this curriculum a reflection of our desires of what we want our environments to look like tomorrow? Because if you are teaching me and you are talking about our environment and you are teaching me about the northern hemisphere, where the environment in which I live in is kind of, I don't have a greater idea of where I live and how to protect that environment, then that is misleading. You see, most of our curriculums are mostly following our colonial heritage and less of kind of a practical based curriculum. So One thing we need to look at is how do we design this curriculum? Climate change is an issue, but we have areas where development priorities and political stance is affecting what we need to do. For example, there are people who are still denying that, okay, it's a natural disaster, it is not induced by climate change, it is not caused by climate change. And now, if these people are in government, then you find that priorities will differ. The people will focus on economic development, they will focus on what the ways they think things should go, but they will neglect the climate aspect of the country. So I think we need climate change education. It doesn't even need to be a curriculum. It needs to start from household. Everybody must understand what is happening. There is a rise in global temperatures. The world is facing an extraordinary pattern in terms of weather patterns, in terms of rising sea level, flooding, coastal cities are being covered by water. So it's something that somebody needs to be aware of and then carry that information down. For example, in Uganda, we have so many different natural disasters happening. We have that of Kasese, the landslides in Kasese. So all of that, we need to get to know our country. We need to educate people about our country and the challenges that our country faces when it comes to climate change. So it is at all levels. There is no specific direction that it's going to take. We start even from family, household level, family level, community level, then we can get now to any other level. But if we don't start in terms of like educating, raising awareness right from the unit of the society, which is the family, then we are always going to be facing these impacts in the near future, even in the now, that will lead to like destroy property, destroy family lives, and destroy an entire civilization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Annette will respond to her questions in the chat, and hopefully I will read this but while we're waiting for Annette, we can proceed. Yeah, so there exists the Sendai Framework like you talked about earlier and the Paris Agreement of 2015. These policies are guiding climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. Like you did mention, Roger, the policies are somewhat lacking in implementation. However, how can we amplify the awareness of these policies in communities of persons with disabilities to enable them take charge of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation strategies?
Thank you so much, Anna. Now, you find that persons with disability are already discriminated against in a normal society. And when you look at this discrimination in terms of like nobody cares, they are, okay, every other kind of thing attached to the stigma that comes, we realize that if you want to amplify the voices or raise awareness of disaster risk reduction or disaster management, then you need to involve persons with disabilities and organizations for persons with disabilities in the planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of programs and policies that are associated with disaster risk management. So if you are not able to involve them and make sure their concerns and their issues are addressed, then it is difficult. So they have to design programs that are inclusive, not only designing programs, because one of the challenges we have is they will say, yes, the policies are there, but are these policies accessible to persons with disability? How can somebody with visual impairment be able to make use of these policies. Now, when you look at the institutions, now even if somebody with disability is aware and wants to get to these ministries to get information, then you find out that the physical space is inaccessible. For example, we had one event the other day and I was at the hotel. Then when I went there to look at the place, I was asking, okay, what, do you have a ramp? No. Do you have a lift? No. So how are we going to do with our invitees who are persons with disabilities? Then the hotel manager told me, Roger, if there are so many of them, then we can help. But if there are 1 or 2 or 3, then we can be able to, like a team, help them come up. I say, how? We are going to carry them. I said, but don't you think it's something that is not right for you to do? Because if you were constructing this place and you put into consideration that persons with disability will be able to access this place and benefit from the services you provide, you would have taken that into consideration. So you find there are a lot of barriers that makes it difficult for persons with disability to also access the required knowledge they need in terms of disaster risk reduction. But that said and done, we need to involve them at every stage. We need to have, but let me start with this thing. There needs to be data. First, we need to know in every community, in every area, especially in disaster risk areas, we need to know the number of persons with disability, boys, girls, elderly. We need to know so that by the time we are looking at planning in terms of disaster preparedness and response, we need to engage these people through data collection. We need to collect the data, we need to analyze the data, and we need to use the data in terms of making decisions that are responsive to the aspirations of persons with disability. Number 2, we need to engage associations, organizations for persons with disability. You see, if you want to get the information, raise awareness about disaster risk reduction or the impacts of climate change on persons with disability, if you take into the consideration that you need some expertise, those who are the voice of persons with disability, then you need to look on how to partner with these organizations of persons with disability so they are able to convey the message. They are able to carry the message right down to the grassroots. Another way we can do it is we build the capacity of persons with disabilities to be climate ambassadors themselves. When persons with disabilities are climate ambassadors, then they can spread the message to their constituencies, and their constituencies are going to listen to them. And at the end, we will find that where there is a feedback mechanisms, there are so many things that are going to follow in terms of the revision of the policies to be inclusive and ensure that persons with disabilities are fully involved in disaster preparedness and response. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger, for the wonderful insights and for the things that you have shared with us. Now, I have also a question. I would love to know, in your observations, where are the start? Where are we failing short when it comes to meeting Sustainable Development Goal 13? And how can we improve progress where marginalized communities are concerned, especially persons with disabilities?
Now, where are we failing? We are failing in terms of the tension between increasing urgency. You see, the speed at which natural disasters, climate-induced disasters are occurring is really, really rapid. Then you look at versus the voluntary governance. Speed, politics, people are making decisions up there, Paris, now we are going to COP29 or what. Now you see all of these decisions they are making in terms of practicalizing all of these policy decisions, it really takes time. You have all of these bottlenecks in governance, and the climate crisis is not waiting for us to make the decisions at the pace at which we want. So we are more of a kind of a responsive society than a proactive society, because the decisions we are making today is being pushed on us based on the emergencies of climate-induced disasters. Then you have to look at the second aspect where we are failing. We are failing because we have to balance development priorities with climate change concerns. For example, we are looking at, let me give an example of the East African crude oil pipeline. This crude oil pipeline is going to destroy hectares and hectares of forests. But we are focusing on the benefits of the oil and neglecting the impacts of the on the climate. And in the long run, or in the near future, because we are already living the impacts of climate change, you will see, as we are fighting to come down to 1.5, we are destroying the same carbon sinks that are supposed to help us capture the carbon. Then you find that that priority of getting 1.5 degrees is a dream that will not come true, because we are failing to balance development priorities with climate change concern. Then you have this political struggle I talked about, where there are people who are denying that there is nothing like climate change. There are occurrences or there are phenomena that have happened in the past. There is nothing like it is climate change causing it or that. So you have the activists now saying, no, it is also climate change, all the disasters, most of the disasters we are facing in terms of landslide, in terms of erratic rainfall patterns, in terms of prolonged dry spells, drought, is a result of climate change. So you see, all of these differences creates that kind of a gap where progress is hindered by the different aspects or the different priorities set above by different governments and all of that. How do we get about it? You see, the Paris Agreement and the Sendai Framework is something that is a cornerstone to reduce natural climate-induced disasters. And so many of these countries are signatories to this convention, to this framework. So what we need to do is to look at how do our governments, you see, we have national determined contributions. If we have national determined contributions and our priorities, our projects, our economic development is not taking into consideration the climate impacts, so how can you say you are going to localize or domesticate the Sendai Framework? So you look at the Sendai Framework, it is very clear to reduce exposures to hazard, reduce vulnerability and build capacity. Then you also have hazard characterization. The real essence of the Sendai Framework was to prevent the creation of new risks, reduce existing risks, and increase resilience. So when you look at governments and you look at our priorities today, you see that our priorities are shifting. People take commitments and they fail to implement those commitments, and we keep turning in that circle of denial, and it's really challenging for local communities, because local communities are just bearing the brunt of failed policy, failed governance in terms of disaster preparedness and response. So until governments have to domesticate this framework and make sure the necessary resources are available for communities to be able to develop mitigation adaptation strategies that are locally led in response to the challenges they are facing, then we will still have a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Starting to see when people make commitments and they really don't implement them, or they don't or work according to what they have committed to. And also, you talked about the governing bodies to be responsible in including persons with disability to be engaged in, like in the beginning, because you say that at the end we, as persons with disability, we respond to what have been said, what has been set up, and that shows that we are not initially consulted on what things that need to be done, on what things that can be helpful for persons with disability in terms of mitigating climate change effects. And also, last year, I got an opportunity to attend an event about climate change, and this one was have they been involved in issues concerning climate change. And we all realize that persons with disability are not consulted in development issues regarding to climate change issues. We just take it note issues are not affecting most of the people with disability. And also, there's somewhere you talked, and I realized that if we had allies in these governing bodies that are in charge of climate change, it would be so beautiful to combat or to see that persons with disabilities can go away with the effects. Because in the beginning you talked about when floods come, persons with disabilities at the last options to be evacuated. So, but if we're there in the beginning, or if we had someone responsible for persons with disability, I don't think would be the last people to be evacuated. So, to the listeners that's in bigger positions of climate change, they need to see that we prioritize persons with disability, we put allies, we put focal persons in all different departments, so that issues of climate change are handled very well in regards to persons with disability. Thank you so much, Roshi. I loved your content, and I love the way you talked about this. Thank you. I really don't know what are we going to do for Annette, because I've heard Shana say that Annette is going to respond through a chat. I don't know how far with that. Let me hand over to Asha let me hand over to Shana if she has another question.
Thank you, Maureen.
Shana, let me come. I want to, before we go to the end, let me say something. You asked in your previous question, how do we move forward? The first thing you have to find out is understanding disaster. Persons, there must be that awareness creation. There must be awareness creation right to the last person with disability to understand what disaster is and what climate change is all about. Number two, we need to improve disaster governance. When I mean disaster governance, it means persons with disability must be present on the table, not like spectators, not like for Photoshop, but their contributions and their perspectives must be taken into consideration when designing these policies. So there must, if it's at national level, there must be representatives of persons with disability at national level where national policies are formulated. If it is at district level, persons with disabilities must be engaged and must be involved in terms of the policies developed at the local level. Even if it is at sub-county, parish, village level, persons with disabilities must, I say it's a must be part of the governance structure when it comes to climate change and disaster preparedness and response. Number three, we have investing in disaster reduction and preparedness. Now, disaster preparedness and response needs money. So they should not be giving money and they say they are giving part and the priorities of persons with disabilities are underfunded. There should be allocation of resources to make sure that the budget they are going to use, the investment they are investing in terms of inclusion, disaster preparedness and response must take into aspiration or must meet the expectations of persons with disability. Now we look at early warning signals. Early warning. Early warning must be inclusive. Early warning should be in a way that somebody with a hard to hearing impairment must be able to have alternatives that will be able to tell them that this is what is going to happen. Weather forecast, there is going to be rain in Kampala, there are going to be floods in these parts of Kampala. The early warning signals must be accessible. What does it for a person who has visual impairment? The person with visual impairment must be able to get information that this is happening and this is how you have to take care. Then when we look at building back, after the disaster, what happens? You find that after the disaster, those who are able, government will come now in terms of disaster response, the aspirations, the expectations of persons with disability are not taken into consideration. You will see people bringing mattresses, they are bringing beds, they are bringing what? But all of this they are bringing without any kind of consultation, without any kind of conversation with persons with disability to understand what are their priorities. You might be bringing somebody a mattress and that person's priority is not a mattress. So you see that resource is wasted. So I think in terms of every aspect, every facet of climate change, disaster preparedness and response, persons with disabilities and organizations with persons with disabilities should be the primary focus and be part and parcel. Participation, effective participation in all of this project or the program cycle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that insight. There are things I did note, but I think I am just so scatterbrained today, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Annette has responded to a question in the chat, so I will read this before we close. She did say that, or she responded to what are some of the barriers that persons with disabilities face in accessing climate change response, recovery and adaptation methods. She said persons with disabilities face a number of challenges which include negative attitudes, the inaccessible physical environment, discrimination and stigma, lack of protection while accessing humanitarian response, and mostly to women with disabilities, they face sexual gender-based violence. So this was our response from Annette, who was our guest speaker, but due to technical issues that we failed to troubleshoot, she could not join us. But I would like to take this time to thank Roger so much. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us your knowledge about climate action and justice. I love that there are things that I relate to or have studied about. Like you mentioned how we have people who are in denial that climate change is happening, which is one of the factors that are holding us back, or rather even the country itself, from taking action where climate change is concerned. But I also like that you mentioned that there's need to map out persons with disabilities within the communities because they are the most affected by the disasters that happen because of climate change. And I think this mapping out will help us in knowing how to accommodate persons with disabilities in times of disaster, because oftentimes they are hardly accommodated, so they find additional challenges to the evacuation centers that they are taken to, which just escalates the negative experiences of the disasters that the trauma rather that they have experienced. But I also like the fact that you noted the need for research. It's quite an important aspect, because without research, there's no proof that something is happening and it needs address. And in disability, I have noticed that we don't have so much research, especially on experiences of persons with disabilities, and also in climate change. I know that CBM is trying to do something about that, but it's not as much as expected. Yeah. I saw Asha put up her hand. Asha, please. You're free to speak.
Thank you, Sana. Good evening, everyone. My name is Asha. I is your co-host. Sorry, today I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, hence not being as active as usual. Shana, it looks like you and Roger kind of covered what I wanted to say. But I wanted to re-echo, what has been already said. And this is in terms of the data. And you mentioned it when you talked about research. No one is worried about or is concerned about the impact of climate change on persons with disabilities or marginalized communities. So I think there is a lot of room for doing research and studies and improvement in that area, and also for collecting data when we are at it. There is also lack of representation. People within our communities are not involved in climate decision-making processes. And I think it goes back to, our organizations, but I think also mainstream organizations are not looking at, they're leaving us behind. And I want to call them out on that one, that organizations that are involved with the climate change are leaving behind persons with disabilities, which should change. The thing of nothing about us without us. We should not be excluded in disaster risk reduction planning and decision making. We are the ones who know how we are affected. We are the ones who know what our challenges are. So when we are left behind, then I think it is a big disservice to humanity. And then, of course, there is also not looking at the other, addressing other vulnerabilities that we're already socially marginalized, and of course there is also poverty and all those inequalities. All these make us even more vulnerable. So without addressing those ones, those issues that already existing, they are leaving us further behind. So I think there is a great need for climate education as I wind up, and awareness, because there are things that I've learned, the little bit that I've been here and the little bit that I had read about for preparing for today's session. I think this is a topic that we are not, I have to say I'm guilty, but we've not taken as serious within, even as individual activists or advocates. So I think there is a lot of need to provide education around this and create awareness programs tailored to persons with disabilities and marginalized communities, and also tailored to our specific needs within our diversities. Thank you so much. And Roger, I'm inspired by your passion. We're discussing in books how it is hard to find a gentleman with such passion about such things. When you're speaking, I almost want to let you speak and listen to you throughout. So thank you for that. Also thank you to our listeners, and of course my co-hosts. Thank you for doing a good job in my absence. Really, and I think this is something that we need to bring back again, this particular goal. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Asha. I like that you also pointed at the complacency of our allies that they're leaving us behind, because I do notice there are so many climate justice programs that are mushrooming all over the place in women's spaces, but you rarely see a person with a disability or a woman with a disability in this space, yeah? So it makes you think, if the ones who are who are mostly affected are not in the space, what does that mean for that population? It's like still we're being what? We're collateral damage, actually. We're collateral damage to the effects of climate change, We're more vulnerable because of this lack of inclusion within the women's spaces and the advocates of climate change. This education is not being extended to our communities. It's not intentional. And yet it needs to be intentional, and it also needs to be meaningful, in that if we have a person with a disability in this space, this person is also given the reasonable accommodation that they need, and not just the person being there for representation purposes, that okay, we had a woman with a disability in the space, but did she contribute meaningfully to the space? Sometimes we're invited just for the disability's sake, for representation that this was in the space, but our contributions being taken note of. So there's also need to consider that. But I like that you did point to the fact that our allies are really leaving us behind in this journey for climate justice. So I won't go beyond that. I would like to appreciate Roger. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your experience and your expertise and your knowledge on this topic. As the feminists here, we're very young and we're just trying to learn. So this has been very, very enlightening for us, and also very interesting because it's helping us see where we need to do better. Thank you so much for that. I will not say much, so I'd like to wish all of you a good night. I don't know if Maureen has something to say, but from me, have a good night.
Thank you so much, Shana, and to our listeners. Thank you so much to Roger for being a wonderful speaker and noting things to air. Maybe my last thing I wanted to point out, as you all said, we need to have focal persons in different forums, and also to see that persons with disability are not just represented, but they should be there in these spaces and make a meaningful impact in regards to climate change. But also awareness and research is really, really needed. That's what I've observed currently, that research is needed in terms of seeing how climate change affects, and even climate justice, to persons with disabilities. Because if we're to ask how many research has been put out to see that, to really see how persons with disabilities are being affected, you find less. This means that you can't address something if you don't know it. So much research is needed, and the findings need to be worked on, because we all get to spaces and we talk about this. We need allies, we need focal people, we need, but again, these things remain there. I liked, Shana, when you say that sometimes people invite us, and when they invite us, they just tick their boxes. What we say, or what people with disabilities say in these spaces, are not worked on. For them, it's a matter of just doing the maybe workshops or conferences. But my appeal is these people should put these things into practical. They should implement whatever we recommend, so that persons with disability can benefit. And also, we shouldn't only look at the effects of climate change, like floods and landslides, it's more beyond that. We should go in details, because you find women with disability are more affected when climate change hits us. Someone will say, for us, maybe in my place, there's no floods, because most people know climate change in terms of floods and landslides, but it's beyond that. Even the we call heat waves affect us, and more research should be, because I had someone talk in one forum that there is a relationship between an increase in disability, which is caused by climate change, that some disabilities are being prone, or they increase because of climate change. But now that's where my research comes in. More research is needed to be made to see really what are those disabilities that when such climate change happens, they're prone to it. So you see, it's beyond the floods and the landslides we normally receive. It should be put into consideration, and more research should be done so that we manage these effects that are coming with climate change. Thank you so much to our listeners and to our speaker of the day. I would